G'day everybody, how you going? Thanks for joining us in our third webinar for this series. This one is another seasonal snapshot of the soil moisture around the state, but what we're also focusing on is the autumn break and what it looks like. Also, all our moisture probe data comes off a combination of AgLogic weather station network probes and farming forecaster sites. Where they're located is representative soils and pastures of the areas. Where they're located is dry side of average, and we like to use this as a bit of a reference for what you see on your farm. So a bit of a brief background, I'll go over this every time, but just to give us a bit of a reference of where we're at based on the data we see. So the things that affect soil type is water holding capacity and infiltration. So all soils behave differently in this way, and we'll go through them a little bit. Rainfall efficacy, application rates. A lot of people have seen that over the last couple of months. We've had some nice summer rains, but they haven't been too efficient just because of a high application rate. And topography and microclimate also affect our soil moisture stored in the profile. This is the graphs that we're going to be looking at. So this is an example, one of the earliest ones that we'll put in as part of a farming forecaster site. So just a bit of a rundown of what we're seeing. This is a view over the last 365 days. The blue line is the last year. And so this point here is where we are at the moment. The dotted yellow line is the previous year. The dotted green line is the year before that. And the grey line is 2001. So it just for reference in terms of what we've gone through over the last couple of years, we can see 2023. So last year was a very dry year, a late winter this year, but good rainfall, whereas 2002 and 2001 were really good springs, and a lot of people weren't actually irrigating until November, December, so quite late. So this gives you a bit of an indication of what some of the graphs we'll be looking at. So I'll go through all parts of the state now. I'll whip through these pretty quickly compared to other webinars, mainly because they're all telling a very similar story that I'm sure we're all aware of, that it's pretty dry. But what I would like to focus on is looking at the autumn break in terms of how effective an autumn break is by looking at the rainfalls doing, but also the irrigation side of how we can replicate an autumn break as well. So if we start with the northwest, we can see here that up through that circular head, pretty similar of where we were same time last year. This actually at the moment, it's apart from a rainfall event this time last year, we're sitting a bit higher up now. I'll go through a few of the graphs of why it's looking that we're actually looking wetter than we were last year. We'll go through those once I've gone to the East Coast. So as you see now, that was back in January, so now we've kind of matched up where we were. In Edith Creek, we were sitting pretty nicely compared to previous year where when we did the last webinar in February, but we can see we've tailed off and met the same point last year. This is going to be repeated fairly commonly throughout the state. Yolla weather station, so that Yolla region on those red ferrosails around that Burnie region matched pretty similar to where we were last year, and it is we've actually been drier since this year compared to last year in that effective rainfall. So like I mentioned, those large rainfall events, they'll summer thunderstorms that came through, and the efficiency wasn't great because a lot of it just ran off, especially where we were already in quite a dry conditions already. If we come further southeast to South Corona, we can see that paints a similar story. Did get rainfall, but how effective it wasn't as effective compared to last year. So we're quite dry compared to the same time last year. Then if we go down to Sassafras, pretty much the same as last year. Across the northeast, Winnaleah, this last webinar, we were kind of sitting a bit higher up where we were the year before last year, but now it's rainfall events, which a lot of the state haven't got, have set things up quite nicely, and so similar rainfall patterns, but just timing just kind of makes it a bit different, but it's pretty similar in terms of where we're sitting seasonally. If we then go across a bit further east to more sandier soils, we can see that we're dried right out in terms of planned available The plants have slowed right down dry moisture, but we are sitting up high where we were compared to last year. Now, a big part of this has been that we actually, and that a lot of that's leading to here. I mentioned Montague as well, how it's kind of sitting above the same time last year, and you go, well, surely there's more moisture that is available to the plants. Yes, there is more plant available moisture, but this is a hangover from this period here. So what we had was we had a drier than average August. So we had good soil moisture, but we weren't wet. So we didn't have waterlogged conditions that we usually find through those winter months. So pasture growth was around most of the state was higher in August than it had been in previous years. And so our pasture growth started a couple of months earlier. So what happened was, though, yes, there was great pasture growth in August, but what it did shift the whole feed window. So the fact that we've got leftover stored subsoil moisture in particular means that is a relic of the plants coming into from vegetative to a reproductive phase a lot sooner. So while they were drawing moisture down here quite happily, they tailed off a lot sooner than they would have earlier. So this is apparent. This has been more apparent in a lot of the lighter soils. As you can see here, West Wyambia closer to the coast, we're seeing that similar pattern there. So those pastures have slowed right down a little bit earlier than they would compared to last year. If we come down south through the Midlands, through the Northern Midlands, January we had some rainfall that kind of kept us up quite nice compared to last year, but we're just the same thing. That earlier seasons saw the pasture physiologically fizzle out a bit. If we come down to Hagley on those heavier soils, on those red ferrous soils, we can see we've pretty much matched where we were the same time last year. Bishop's Burn, similar story. There's a couple of rains that have sat it up a little bit, but hasn't really done much in terms of plant available moisture. As we come down to Elsdon, we can see that we're very similar. Now, what we've got here is the year prior, so we're into the third year of measuring our soil moisture here, and while that was a fantastic spring, it shows that there's no free lunch at all. We all get a benefit somewhere in the year. It's just where that falls depends, and we usually come to this point as well. And hopefully we have a good autumn break. So we'll see what happens this autumn. If we go through the Southern Midlands, we can see that again, pretty similar, exactly the same position as where we were through that Campbelltown region, and this is on a lighter soil type. And then further down, all three seasons have matched that pretty much that same location as well. So we're seeing that replication in terms of where we are at the start of August, at the start of autumn. The East Coast and Fingal Valley, so through that Cranbrook region, things were matching up pretty nicely in January, and they've pretty much continued that same pattern through to now. And Kelvin a bit further south, those last year and this year, similar soil moisture. That spring that they had the previous year was one that just continued on, and that elevated soil moisture, but that's something we haven't seen in a couple of years. If we come along to the Fingal Valley, which is in its fourth year of monitoring the soil moisture, we can see those that 2022 and 2021 springs, those were one out of the bag, two out of the bag, but we can see this year now that we've matched where we were last year. But we can see, as with most places around the state, we can see we've got those rainfall events in summer that we didn't get, which kind of propped up our pasture growth. And then we come along closer to Avoca in Speyside. They're pretty much married up the same time pace as well. Derwent Valley, there's from this last webinar, we were sitting, there was rainfall that occurred last year that we didn't get, but again, those summer rainfalls were quite ineffective, but we've pretty much matched the same point. And Wetheron, which is closer to Bothwell, we're sitting at the same point now as well. Comments from people in the area is we're typically where we are usually. So last year was very difficult, as you can see where this winter soil moisture got to. At least this year we had a good spring that gave us some good soil moisture to kick the season off with. If you go into the Cold River Valley, we can see we're pretty similar in terms of seasonal soil moisture. But again, similar to the Drought Valley, we at least got that spring that gave a good boost of pasture growth. And this one here in Stockdale, we've got a few sites and they experienced a very dry winter last year. And we can see this discrepancy here, which is very different from everywhere else, was purely based on the fact that we didn't get any moisture in the subsoil. So pasture just didn't have a chance to grow, get its roots down into the profile because of low penetration resistance, which is related to soil moisture. And so this year we had adequate soil moisture come through winter, so plants were able to get their roots down into the subsoil and extract that moisture out. So yes, while the soils are drier now when they were last year, just the simple fact was the plants have the ability to get their roots down and dry that subsoil moisture here that they didn't have last year. If we go up to the islands, you can see Happy Valley just outside the capital up there on the sandy soils out under Mount Strzelecki. Had that beautiful December rainfall there, which just kept things ticking along really nicely, but that started to slow down and catching up. And so that moisture there has been drawn up down at 1.20 m depth, and more in the centre of the island. We can see that it's matched up pretty much typical of what we see on a Flinders Island autumn. If you go across to King Island, we can see here that Egg Lagoon, so your semi-coastal soil, was tracking very similar. One little rainfall there didn't do too much, and things have matched where we were last year. But this has been a big difference this year on the island compared to last year, which was worst conditions in 100 years, mainly because we had this drier than average winter, but good soil moisture, and this summer rainfall, which topped things up quite nicely. We can see a very similar story there at Bargara, where that early season you can see has left a little bit of subsoil moisture left, but that's only because the plant's gone to that reproductive phase a little bit earlier. And if we go into Linwood, which is more of a high rainfall area of the island and heavier soils, they've been able to extract that moisture out and keep on a little bit longer. And you can see that it's pretty much on par with where we were last year. So that's just a quick snapshot. Zip through that bit faster than usual, but yeah, I think the upshot is it's a typical autumn where we are at the moment. So I just want to talk about the autumn break. What is it? So essentially rainfall of 25 or more millimetres received over a period of less than 3 days, or 30 mils received over a period of less than 7 days. So that's the official definition, I guess. But as I want to show you some data, it's not everything in terms of looking at these numbers and saying, yeah, well, we've had an autumn break. What I really want us to start to bring into how we think about our rainfall, and when we see that an arbitrary number of 25 or 35 millimetres is what is that rainfall worth to us. And of course, the timing is important. The earlier, the better. And you also want some follow-up rain. So the later you're into it, the later that you get that autumn break. And they talk about the end of the autumn break. These rainfalls need to fall by Anzac Day, so 25th of April. So where that falls is important, because then you're starting to drop your temperatures, stop your sunlight's starting to drop. So that impacts your pasture growth. So that big question, what is your rainfall worth to you? So I'm going to talk to this in a soil moisture context, and looking at the soil moisture, and to give us a bit more indication of how the autumn break's going. But it's really important to do that in conjunction with the plant when you're looking at how it's performing on your property. So yes, you might have great soil moisture or adequate soil moisture. So you might have an adequate amount of rainfall and the soil moisture has responded accordingly, but you really need to look at how your pasture is performing, so species wise. Have a look at your day length, have a look at your temperature, because the sooner the better, because then you're still in those warm periods and good photo period. Otherwise, you might get into that area where you get that rainfall, but all you get is a bit of green on top. You don't actually get that growth. So you look at it and go, yep, I can see a reaction from that 25, 40 mils of rainfall, but that's what, you know, we coined the green drought. So what we want to make sure is we have growth there and not just green pick, or just a greenie of the grass. And usually that growth, if there's growth in the pasture, that's going to happen 3 to 4 weeks after that rainfall's occurred. So understanding that there's going to be that lager phase if it does come. So when I talk about what's your rainfall worth to, this is something I want to pick out from last year's autumn in the Meander Valley from what our weather station site. We can see here we had a 65 mil rainfall event, so it's nearly 70 millimeter rainfall event. Now, the thing that I saw off this, and talking to a couple of people in the area, they got this rainfall event. And they see, yeah, I mean that definitely I guess it qualifies as an autumn break based on 60 odd mils. But what we want to then look at is go, well, just not the number. We look at the number and go, yep, everything's fine. That's great. I'm going to go do decisions based on that, stocking decisions. But actually, if you're just looking in a bit more detail, we can see here that, to my surprise, when I'm looking at this data, how much of an impact that rainfall actually had on soil moisture. So there's 2 points here. Number one, the jump up isn't as great as what we would expect or what we would hope. There's a couple of things here, and we'll go into that when I'll show you a bit more data. So it hasn't increased soil moisture to a level that we would have hoped a 60 mil rainfall would have given us. But the other real key indicator here is that it flatlined. We didn't see any. So if we look at this part of the graph, we can see rainfall here. This has then shown that the gradient here is showing that moisture has been taken up by the pasture. This flat line here shows us that the rain fell. Yes, some of it stored within the profile, and we can see here it's kind of bypassed the 10 centimeters, been stored in the mid layers of the soil. It's in the profile, but it hasn't been used by the plant. So what you can say is, yeah, I got the rain, right, things are looking green, but if you wait a week or two, or wait a week, you can see there that the chances are that it's going to actually be utilised by the plant, which goes into pasture growth. I wouldn't have confidence in it. So that's a bit of an indication there of understanding what the rainfall is worth to you in the sense of an autumn break. If we go to the next one, this one is down at near Bothwell. You can see here they got a rainfall event here, which is over an inch. So again, it qualifies as an autumn break, but it did absolutely nothing. Now, they came out of a very dry season, and so what we found is you had your hydrophobicity on your sandy site. There's a lot of crusting, a lot of parched pastures, say that 10 times, and so a lot of runoff. And the other key thing here with this one and the previous one, we can see it's a big tall skyscraper that kind of sits by itself. So that is in terms of how that rain all fell within a day. So we're talking about application efficiency. So this is the time of year that you want to have a rainfall that's spread over a number of days. And this is an example of it. So this is one that I had to go back in the archives a bit. So this is on the East Coast, and we can see the difference we had here. So if you look at that spike there, that was about a 30 mil rainfall event, but then we had another 16 and this little patch here. And this is the important part. We can see here that this rainfall that led to this increase in soil moisture was preceded by some drizzly days. Now, what that does for infiltration means it breaks down any hydrophobicity that you might have. So then this larger rainfall event actually has that efficacy when it comes to infiltration. And the other thing we want to see is, if we jump back to these two, we can see here that flat line. So that's not water. That's not going to affect pasture growth. That's going to affect your winter refill. So these points here, how quickly you get to winter refill. That one there was just a bit of a blip on the ocean, didn't really do much. But this one here, we can see we got that rainfall, but then we started to get that diurnal step, and we started to get that drop down in soil moisture that is typical when it comes to pasture uptake. So this here is what we define. It gets defined as an autumn break, but of those three examples is really the only one that I could say would give you effective pasture growth. I think this was I'll just go back into 2022 for this to show a good example. So when you keep talking about what's your rainfall worth to you, it also is really dependent on soil type. So if you look at the again, this autumn, a rainfall event that, yes, it is quantified as an autumn break, but the issue here is the soil that we're dealing with here is a crack and clay. And so on a sandier site, you might have your infiltration, or a lighter soil type, your infiltration will fill from the top down. And so it's within a majority of it was in the effective root zone of the crop, of the plant, or the pasture. But in this site here where you got cracking clays, and we might see this on a farm, on your farm, where you might have, you dry hills, but then you also have, say, some river flats, so some black cracking clays that behave similar to this. And at the moment, if you go out and have a look at those sites, you'll see that you've got cracks. So where that water goes on, it goes in, but it bypasses the top. In this case, it's the top 60 centimeters, and it's only really the 70, 80 centimeters that you're getting that water storage. Now, the plant's using this, but what we need to understand is how much of it is actually going to growth, or how much is the plant using just as that survival, as part of that survival. So it's, how does your soil behave? How's your soil looking this time of year? So where does your water sit within the profile is something really important to look at. So they're the kind of things, hopefully, fingers crossed, in the next couple of weeks. It doesn't look likely this week, but hopefully in the weeks following that, we get our rainfall. It's important to understand your soil and where that water might sit. And so we've got the weather station network and this farmer forecaster sites around the place, and you can use that as a bit of a proxy to go, okay, this is where the rainfall fell. How's it looking in this part of this region closer to me? And so based on, hopefully we get that seasonal rainfall, I've just jumped onto the bomb, and they spoke about it on the Country Hour earlier this week. Essentially, we've got a 50% chance of exceeding average rainfall for the next 3 months. So while we're typically where we are sitting stored soil moisture wise for autumn, the next 3 months looks fairly typical in terms of our forecast rainfall. And this is just giving you a bit of an indication of what our rainfall is for the next 3 months based on our 50% medium chance of rainfall. So this workshop is part of the Pinion Water Sufficiency Project, and it's part of the irrigation module. So one of the things I want to talk about, and one of the few things I want to talk about, which just kind of building as I started looking at the data with a lot of the probes and clients that I have around the state at the moment, is how can we replicate the autumn break? So what if we don't get the rain that we hope for, but we can irrigate? That's a big question that I get a lot. And that's kind of split into two that we'll talk about. It's either continuing or starting irrigation. So it might be pastures that you're already irrigating, so you're just continuing on. How do you best do it coming into winter? Or are you starting irrigation? So these scenarios are where you might have spuds, for example, and you've got the hard hose or the soft hose of the hard hose running through the spuds, and your spuds are out, and you're going, right, I've still got some water up my sleeve, I want to put it onto my pasture. So what's the best way of going around that? Or even if you're sowing some pastures. The important part there is to know where your soil and where your soil moisture is. So know your soil. So important to understand your soil type, and where it will be sitting based on some of the things we spoke about in the first 20 minutes of the webinar, and where your soil moisture is within that profile. You have to know that to be able to, especially when it comes to starting irrigation. Continue irrigation, you've got a bit of a handle on that, but when it comes to starting irrigation, this point is so important. The other part of matching replicating the autumn break is irrigating to match your plant evaporation, and there's tools that we can use around that, which I'll show you in a minute. And tailing off your irrigation. So don't go cold turkey. Don't just go, right, I've put it on, I'm going to stop. We can do it in a way matching ETO, which tails nicely into winter. So again, knowing the soil, and we looked at this graph earlier, does this happen? That's a really important one. So if you get that 25 mils of rainfall, what happens? Or irrigation, or is it a soil like this? So this one here is we've dried up our pasture. We haven't been irrigating our pasture, but we can catch up. We can see here that we can put that irrigation on, and we can get to a point where we're quite happy in terms of where we are stored moisture-wise leading into autumn. So knowing whether your soil behaves like that or like this. Or behaves like this. So your soil's dried out a little bit and you've started to put irrigation on, completely bypass 10 and 20 centimeters. And what you're doing here is, are you just replicating the green drought? Are all you're doing just putting on rainfall just to keep that green tinge, or is it actually leading to moisture that the pasture is going to take up and grow feed with? Are you putting on enough? Again, I'll look at this. Yep, this is kind of, all this is doing is topping up 30 centimeters, but we can already see here that we can see a bit of root activity down at depth. That's happening here as well, and root activity down at depth. So I'm looking at this going, what you're doing is not keeping up with plant demand. And then my next question is, how much of that is actually then leading on to growing pasture, as opposed to just keeping it green and looking nice. So matching ETO, if you don't have a soil moisture probe with that kind of data, matching ETO is something that you can use as a bit of a proxy. So this is the ETO that I've pulled off the weather station at Longford, just down from the office. And so you can see here at the previous week, if you wanted to maintain pasture growth, so this is pasture growth. So this ETO, evapotranspiration, is ETO is a crop factor of 1. So that's a pasture at about 12 to 15 centimeters of height. You would be needing to put on, the fact that we didn't have any rain last week, you would have needed to put on around that 37, 38 mils just to keep up with pasture growth. So then if we look at that, how that looks coming into winter, you can see here. So that's that. So from this is that similar ETO, and as we can see how that's decreasing over through to the end of May. So trying to look at these ETOs and tailing off based on what your ETO is telling you. So this is as temperatures decrease and as sunlight hours decrease, your ETO decreases as well, but also your pasture, how tall is your pasture? So using this as a reference, so this is a reference with the crop factor of 1. How does your pasture compare? And you can use that as a bit of a proxy. And this here, just to give you a bit of a visualization how that ETO changes over the season. So this is our peak irrigation season over summer, and how it drops off over those winter months purely because of day length and temperature. And so how we use that, so ETO as your crop coefficient, which drives those ETO calculations based on those absolute millimeters. We can see here, this is just a bit of a background. A low and crop factor of 0.1, 0.2 at the various stages, and as your plant grows, as your leaf area grows, that increases. And if we look at that pasture as a crop factor of 1, that's our peak irrigation. But as that decreases, so yes, as your plants get grazed and you go into dormancy, that can drop back down to that 0.4, 0.3 ETOs as well. So there's plenty of literature there around that as well. But a lot of you might be asking, that's all well and good, Marek, I'm putting on water now, but hey, winter's coming and there's going to be rainfall with that. I'm not going to irrigate, because why would I want to get it wet, but things just make things worse when winter comes. Now, okay, fair enough. If you're really worried about getting too wet through winter or spring, you can put, and you don't need to irrigate, pull back now, that's fine. But if you need to continue your pasture growth now through that autumn period, there are ways we can irrigate to try, and then which hopefully gives you the best of both worlds. You can continue that pasture growth, but also make sure that you've got some storage for that winter rainfall, so it's not completely wasted. So here's an example of what we can do. So, and this is where it comes down to matching ETO, or what we do is going, well, and knowing where our soil profile is. If we're going, yep, here we can be pretty confident in December that we're at full profile. We've got a nice rainfall event that set us up nicely. I know that I've irrigated my pastures coming through, and you can look at that and say, well, you can see here we're irrigating, and we're just irrigating essentially to the top 20 centimeters. Now, in terms of majority of your water available to the pasture, that's perfect. As soon as they're drawing moisture past 30 centimeters as a bulk of their uptake, you're getting a reduction in growth. But what we can do here is, as we're going to those autumn months, we can start to pull back our irrigation, so we start to get moisture uptake at depth. So that stored soil moisture at depth is supplementing the irrigation that we're putting on the top 20 centimeters. And if we continue, we can those can all flat line out. That means we've got some storage to put winter refill in, but then we can also just keep the pasture growing through autumn as much as we can. And when you decide to switch that off, based on your stocking needs or your water availability, or when you're going, yep, that's enough, it's when I can pull back. So the key here is to irrigate to the point where you're creating that storage underneath. Sorry. So that kind of gives us a bit of an indication of our pastures, and if we can irrigate them, and if we can do a bit of a dry land, replicate our autumn break, the things to consider. But the other one I want to touch on is things that are now going in the ground now. So we've sown, we've got germination is the key. So we're not trying to keep pastures or plants growing. What we want to do is actually get things out of the ground. And this is where we've got to ask the question, is what we're putting on actually going in? So when I talk about that, this is one of the slides that I keep pulling up and I keep finding that I'm using is, number one is to get a bit of a system application check or a validation. Make sure your pivot's doing what it says it's doing, or make sure your irrigation is doing what you think it's doing. So whether that's the amount, whether that's uniformity, whether it's your nozzles are unblocked and they're putting out the amount you want. Because this was after one of the first irrigation on a new spud crop, and we obviously can tell there's something going on there. Now, in this time of year where we got quite high ETO still, so high temperatures, especially coming up this weekend. So in the 30s, we got wind and exposed soil, high likelihood of crusting or hydrophobicity on exposed soils like this. Now, if you miss one or two irrigations just due to unblock, to block nozzles, it can really make a big difference in terms of that germination and your overall uniformity and establishment coming through the season. So a number one thing, especially on soils that have poor infiltration, does your application rate exceed your infiltration rate? Okay. Do you have any kind of preferential flow? And this is another slide that I've brought out on multiple times. And all I've done is a hydrophobic sand on the surface. It looks great. But then when you just scrape down literally 5 centimeters, you can see that, well, you're getting preferential flow off the mounds into the furrows. So if you've got crops that have been bed formed, are you getting preferential flow? Are you getting preferential flow by the soils dried coming out of straight out of a crop that's dried the soil out so much that you're getting cracks, or you're getting macropore flow? That's a question you need to ask. But also go to the parts of your paddock that are the more susceptible areas. So you might have some areas which have got really good organic matter, low-lying areas, they don't have any trouble wetting up. But then you've got some higher banks which might have some wind-blown sands, that have some infiltration issues. Go to those areas and see what's going on. Okay, so are you getting runoff? If you run your irrigator around, can you see water flowing off? Things like that. And I've got some data here. This is a site which is literally data I've pulled off this morning. This is a site that we know that this is a high risk. And so what we've done here is an irrigation, and I've put a couple of probes in purely just to see that are we getting infiltration that we need for good seed germination. So these are two probes off the one unit. We can see here that, yep, we put a 6.5 mil irrigation on. We can see that it's going that top 10 centimeters. We can see here that we've got a bit more, that second irrigation. Yep, we've got a bit of infiltration. Okay, hoping for more, but we've got some. But then we look down the next probe, and I deliberately put these two, one that I was confident that I'd get some infiltration, and one that I thought it might be an issue. And we can see here that we've had no real uptake in soil moisture in that top 10 centimeters in these two irrigations. So I spoke to the farm. So let's try and do a double your application and halve the rate, but put on twice in a row to try and hopefully this breaks down that hydrophobicity, and this second one goes in. Now, yep, it did the job here. No difference to those two really, but it didn't do much at all in that really high risk site. So this is one I'll take back to the drawing board and go, let's see what we can do. Ideally, we wait for, if we can get some rain, we want to irrigate after a rain, because that rain will then hopefully wet things to a point that we can get that infiltration. But this is an example of, we assume what's going on is going in. We've got to ask ourselves the question, and digging around, scraping around that topsoil and that high risk areas is really important. And this is just comparing the two sites. So we can see here, this probe here has not too much of a problem, but this one here, we've had no uptick whatsoever, or very, very minor, but very little uptake on that irrigation. So it's one that we want to make sure that we're on top of, because this is where you look at a paddock, in about 4 or 5 weeks' time, and you see these patchy areas, and you go, I don't know what happened there. It could be a number of things, but if we can start to understand how our soils behave in terms of uptake, especially this time of year where it's hot and windy and dry, especially where the soil's been dried out from a previous crop, making sure that we've got eyes on that. So the questions to ask: do you have any surface crusting or hydrophobicity? Are you getting surface runoff? Just have a walk after walk behind your irrigator when it's going on. Can you see water pooling and running? If you have a 6 meter irrigation, you shouldn't really see that. That should all be going in, but are you seeing it running off? That can highlight the issue. Halve the rate to back-to-back irrigations. That's one that works most of the time, but in this case it hasn't. So we'll have a look at it. But again, irrigating after a rain. Rains are great for infiltration because they're a low application rainfall event if it's not a thunderstorm, but they're low application definitely compared to a pivot. So if we irrigate after rain, hopefully that's done half the work for us. We can get a bit more moisture into the profile. So the key takeaways from today, and it looks like I'm on time, which is amazing. What is your rainfall worth to you? Now, this is not just a question that we want to be asking now based on our autumn break, but any rainfall. If you base decisions around the arbitrary millimetres that fell based on what was in your rain gauge, you're not getting the full story. So having a look at the soil moisture data, having a look at how things are reacting to it are really important. So at the moment, for autumn, they soil moisture, how's that rainfall worth to you in terms of the soil moisture, but also your plant factors? How are they reacting to that rainfall? In terms of the outlook, look, we're at a 50% chance of exceeding autumn rainfall across most of the states. So look, business as usual. It's that average in the vertical season. You can strategically irrigate your pastures going into winter, whatever your goal is. If you want to just continue to grow as much feed as you can, maintain irrigation to your ETO, to your plant ETO. If you're worried about getting too wet through winter or early spring, you can back off and jaws up some subsoil moisture, but also continually grow your pastures at the same time. So you can be strategic in the way you irrigate your crops based on what your specific outcome is. And for those newly sown pasture paddock, which at the moment, which are sitting bare, which are the elements of the sun and the wind and warm temperatures, is what's going in. I think that's one of the real inefficiencies when it comes to this irrigating this time of year. So a lot of that data has come from our weather station network, which you can see on the left-hand side is the locations. If you want to jump on and access that weather station data, there's the code to scan it. But also I want to just mention some upcoming webinars and workshops as part of the project. So the seasonal snapshot, the last one we'll have will be after that Anzac Day. What kind of water break did we get, and having a look at it and seeing what what that rainfall was worth to us. We also have workshops that go in conjunction with this with these webinars, which is split into two: a soils 101 workshop. So that's looking at the fundamentals of soil science. So that's saying you can bring your soils, we can really get into the nitty gritty of those different soil types, how they behave and why they behave is a real big question. So you know how your soil behaves, when things happen and when you do things, but we're looking into the why they happen. And then that'll be followed up in the different regions a fortnight later with a second workshop, which will be more based around data decision-driven irrigation decision-making. So that's one where you can bring your data, bring your questions, and we'll really go into the nitty-gritty there and based on what are those colourful squiggly lines telling you. So they're hopefully addressing questions that you do have. And here are those workshops. There's the Richmond one, those two have been done, but the next one is in Longford. So on the 12th of March, so next week, which will be followed up in 2 weeks after that with the data-driven irrigation scheduling workshop. But then we also have 3 more in Burnie, Scottsdale, and on the East Coast in Swansea. So you can feel free to scan that that barcode and register and jump on for those. That's pretty much all I needed to say. If you feel like you've got nothing else to do, which I'm sure none of you do, there's a feedback survey barcode that you can scan and give your feedback based on the webinar. I really do appreciate it, mainly because I know we can sit here and talk about the things we like to talk about in our own little echo chambers, but any feedback that I get based on what you need or the things that you want addressed in these webinars or workshops, I take all of that on board, because I'm not interested in talking about what I like talking about. I want to hear what is going to make a difference in terms of that, driving those decisions based on the data. I've got the data, I've got the interpretation, but how can I do that in a way that helps you, maximize that information? So thanks for joining me, and thanks for listening. If you're one of those people that listens to it later when it gets sent through, so this will get sent through as part of your registration. So if you love to see it, one of the upcoming workshops. If not, I look forward to the next webinar, looking at how this autumn went. Thanks. Bye.